They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when family becomes your biggest obstacle? Elizabeth Martinez thought she could trust her uncle with her future. She was wrong. Dead wrong. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Elizabeth Martinez had always been different from the rest of her family. While her cousins spent summers lounging by pools and shopping at malls, she buried herself in textbooks and research papers. Her bedroom walls were covered not with pop star posters, but with charts of molecular structures and photos from NASA missions. At 17, she already knew exactly what she wanted: a degree in aerospace engineering from MIT. The dream seemed impossible for a girl from a working-class family in Phoenix, Arizona. Her mother, Carmen, worked double shifts as a hospital nurse, and her father had passed away when Elizabeth was 12, leaving behind only medical bills and a small life insurance policy. But Carmen Martinez was determined that her daughter would have opportunities she never did. "Mija, your brain is your ticket out of here," Carmen would say, watching Elizabeth solve calculus problems at their kitchen table. "Education is the one thing no one can take from you." From the time Elizabeth was 13, Carmen had been setting aside money for college. $20 here, $50 there, every spare penny went into a savings account specifically earmarked for Elizabeth's education. Carmen worked holidays, picked up extra shifts, and never bought herself anything unnecessary. She drove a 15-year-old Honda with a broken air conditioner through Arizona summers because every dollar saved was a dollar toward Elizabeth's future. Elizabeth knew about the sacrifices. She saw her mother's exhaustion, the way Carmen would fall asleep fully clothed after 18-hour shifts. It only made Elizabeth work harder. She maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA while tutoring younger students for extra money, which she insisted on contributing to the college fund despite her mother's protests. By Elizabeth's senior year, they had managed to save $18,000. It wasn't enough for MIT's full tuition, but combined with financial aid and the academic scholarships Elizabeth was pursuing, it would make her dream possible. The money sat safely in a joint savings account that Carmen had opened with her brother, Roberto, as a co-signer. She'd needed someone with better credit to help establish the account years earlier, and Roberto had seemed like the obvious choice. Roberto Martinez was everything Carmen wasn't. Where she was cautious with money, he was flashy. Where she worked steadily in healthcare, he jumped from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. He owned a small construction company that seemed to alternate between boom and bust cycles, drove a brand new pickup truck, and always had the latest iPhone. His house in Scottsdale was 3 times the size of Carmen and Elizabeth's modest apartment, complete with a pool and a 3-car garage. "Roberto's doing so well for himself," Carmen would often say with pride. "He's always been the smart one with money." Elizabeth had never been comfortable with her uncle. There was something about the way his eyes lit up when he talked about money, the way he'd boast about his latest business deals at family gatherings while her mother served everyone dinner on plates she'd bought at a thrift store. But Carmen trusted her brother completely, and Elizabeth had learned not to question her mother's judgment about family. The first sign of trouble came in February of Elizabeth's senior year. Carmen went to check the college fund balance and discovered that $3,000 was missing from the account. When she called Roberto, he explained casually that he'd had a temporary cash flow problem with a big construction job. "Don't worry, Carmen, it's just a loan. I'll have it back in the account by next week," he assured her. Carmen was upset but tried not to show it in front of Elizabeth. Family helps family, she told herself, even as worry lines deepened around her eyes. Next week came and went, then another. When Carmen called again, Roberto's tone had shifted from apologetic to irritated. "Look, sis, business is business. That money is just sitting there anyway. Elizabeth's got months before she needs it, and I've got bills to pay now. You know I'm good for it." "Roberto, that money is for Elizabeth's education. We've been saving for years. And you'll have it back. Jesus, Carmen, you act like I'm some kind of criminal. It's just a temporary thing." But temporarily stretched into weeks, and weeks into months. Each time Roberto called had a new excuse. The construction job had been delayed, his client was late with payment, the bank was being difficult about a loan. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was getting acceptance letters from colleges, each one requiring enrollment deposits and housing fees that they could no longer afford. Elizabeth knew her mother's increasing anxiety, but didn't know the cause. Carmen worked even longer hours, took on additional weekend shifts, and started selling items around the house. First her jewelry, then furniture, then her father's old tools that she'd kept in storage. Elizabeth assumed it was just normal financial stress and threw herself even harder into her scholarship applications. In April, everything fell apart. Carmen went to make what she thought would be the final deposit into the college fund, money she'd scraped together from months of extra work, only to discover that the account was completely empty. $18,000, 5 years of sacrifice, gone. When she confronted Roberto this time, he wasn't even pretending to be apologetic. "Look, Carmen, I had an opportunity, a really big opportunity. You wouldn't understand because you don't know business, but sometimes you have to spend money to make money." "What opportunity? Roberto, that was Elizabeth's college money. And it's going to be a lot more college money when this deal pays off. I'm talking about turning 18 grand into 60, maybe 80,000. Elizabeth should be thanking me." Carmen's voice was shaking. "What if it doesn't pay off? What if you lose it all?" Roberto's laugh was cold. "I'm not going to lose it all. I know what I'm doing. But even if something goes wrong, Carmen, you need to face reality here. Elizabeth's got these big dreams about MIT, about being some kind of rocket scientist, but dreams don't pay bills. Maybe it's time she learned that the world doesn't owe her anything just because she's smart." The words hit Carmen like a physical blow. "Dreams don't pay bills? Roberto, she's your niece. She's brilliant. She deserves every chance." "She deserves to learn how the real world works. College is expensive, Carmen. Even with that money, you think 18 grand was going to cover MIT? You're looking at 50, 60,000 a year. Face it, you can't afford it. I did you a favor by showing you that now, instead of letting you go into debt you'll never climb out of." Carmen hung up the phone and sat in her kitchen, staring at the bank statement that showed a balance of 0. 5 years of sacrifice, of choosing between paying for groceries and putting money aside for Elizabeth's future, erased by her brother's casual cruelty. That night, Carmen had to tell Elizabeth the truth. She sat her daughter down at their kitchen table, the same table where Elizabeth had spent countless hours studying, and explained what had happened. Elizabeth listened in silence as her mother, with tears streaming down her face, described Roberto's betrayal. She watched her strong, resilient mother break down as she admitted that the college fund was gone, that the money Elizabeth was counting on for MIT had been gambled away on one of Roberto's business ventures. "I'm so sorry, mija," Carmen whispered. "I trusted him. I thought family meant something." Elizabeth felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that. Something else. Determination. Her uncle thought dreams didn't pay bills. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. The silence in their small apartment felt suffocating after Carmen's revelation. Elizabeth stared at the bank statement, the zeros seeming to mock years of careful planning. But instead of the tears her mother expected, something else took hold, a fierce, burning resolve that surprised them both. "Mom, look at me," Elizabeth said quietly. Carmen raised her red-rimmed eyes. "This isn't over." While Carmen slept fitfully that night, Elizabeth was wide awake at her computer. She wasn't wallowing or crying, she was researching. Every scholarship database, every grant program, every competition she could find. Her acceptance to MIT still stood, but the May 1st enrollment deadline was just 2 weeks away, and she needed a miracle. The next morning, Elizabeth made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to school, she drove her mother's old Honda to Roberto's construction office in Scottsdale. She'd never confronted him directly before, always letting Carmen handle family matters. But this was her fight now. Roberto's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service.
The sign outside read Martina's Construction Solutions in faded letters. Elizabeth pushed through the glass door to find Roberto behind a metal desk, feet up, scrolling through his phone. Well, well, if it isn't the little genius, he said without looking up. Let me guess, Mommy sent you to beg for your college money back? Actually, she doesn't know I'm here. Elizabeth's voice was steady, controlled. I wanted to hear it from you directly, about how dreams don't pay bills. Roberto finally looked at her, a smirk playing at his lips. Kid, I did you a favor. You think MIT was going to solve all your problems? You'd graduate with $100,000 in debt if you even made it through. Those fancy schools aren't for people like us. People like us? Poor people, Elizabeth. Working class people. You can get all the A's you want, but at the end of the day, those rich kids with connections are going to get good jobs. You're better off going to community college, maybe getting an associate's degree in something practical.
Elizabeth studied her uncle's face. The designer sunglasses pushed up on his head, the expensive watch, the brand new smartphone. Is that what you tell yourself? That we're just poor people who should be grateful for scraps? I tell myself the truth, which is more than your mother does, filling your head with fairy tales about being a rocket scientist. And what did you do with our money? What was this big opportunity worth stealing from your niece? Roberto's expression darkened. I didn't steal anything. I made an investment. Sometimes investments don't work out. That's business. What investment? For the first time, Roberto looked uncomfortable. He shifted in his chair, no longer meeting her eyes. It doesn't matter. The point is, you need to be realistic about your options. The point is, you gambled away my future because you thought I didn't deserve one. Elizabeth stood up. You're wrong about everything, Uncle Roberto. About me, about dreams, about what people like us can achieve. And I'm going to prove it. Roberto laughed, but it sounded forced. Yeah? And how exactly are you going to do that with no money and 2 weeks until your enrollment deadline? Elizabeth didn't answer. She simply walked out, leaving Roberto staring after her. Back home, Elizabeth threw herself into scholarship applications with an intensity that worried her mother. She worked 18-hour days, crafting essays, preparing portfolio materials, and reaching out to every academic contact she'd made through her high school science programs. Her physics teacher, Mrs. Chen, had been following Elizabeth's situation and suggested she apply for the Patricia Morgan Memorial Scholarship, a full ride to MIT specifically for first-generation college students from underserved communities. The application was extensive, requiring not just academic transcripts, but a detailed personal statement, letters of recommendation, and a presentation of original research. Elizabeth, the deadline for this scholarship was 3 months ago, Mrs. Chen admitted, but I have a contact in their office, Dr. Sarah Kim. She graduated from our school 15 years ago. She might be willing to make an exception if your application is extraordinary. Extraordinary. Elizabeth had 48 hours to put together what other applicants had spent months perfecting. She chose to present her research on lightweight composite materials for spacecraft construction, work she'd been doing independently since sophomore year in her school's tiny, underfunded lab. While other students were at prom or senior parties, Elizabeth had spent weekends experimenting with different polymer combinations, documenting everything with the precision of a graduate student. Her personal statement was raw and honest. She wrote about her father's death, about watching her mother work herself to exhaustion, about discovering that her own family saw her dreams as foolishness. But she also wrote about resilience, about the fuel that comes from being underestimated, about the responsibility she felt to prove that brilliance doesn't require privilege. Dr. Kim agreed to review the application, but her response was cautionary. Elizabeth, even if I can get you in front of the committee, the Patricia Morgan Scholarship only goes to 1 student per year. Last year, we had over 3,000 applicants from across the country. Your work looks impressive, but you're competing against students from elite prep schools with resources you can't imagine. I understand, Elizabeth replied. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for a chance to compete.
The presentation was scheduled for a Friday afternoon via video conference. Elizabeth sat up in the empty school library, her research materials spread across 3 tables. On the other side of the screen were 5 MIT professors and Dr. Patricia Morgan's daughter, who administered the scholarship fund. Elizabeth began with her composite material research, explaining her methodology and findings with the confidence of someone who had lived and breathed the subject for 2 years. But what captured the committee's attention wasn't just her technical knowledge, it was her resourcefulness. "Miss Martinez," interrupted Dr. Jennifer Ross, a material science professor, "these results suggest you achieved a 23% improvement in tensile strength while reducing weight by 15%. What equipment did you use for stress testing?" Elizabeth smiled slightly. "That's where it gets interesting, Dr. Ross. Our school doesn't have a universal testing machine, so I had to improvise. I built my own testing apparatus using a hydraulic car jack, precision scales, and strain gauges I purchased with my own money. It's not as sophisticated as what you have at MIT, but the principles are the same." The room went quiet. Dr. Ross leaned forward. "You built your own testing equipment?" "Yes, ma'am. I have documentation of the calibration process and accuracy comparisons with standard equipment at the local community college, which I was able to access twice for validation." Another committee member, Dr. Michael Torres, spoke up. "Ms. Martinez, in your personal statement, you mentioned family challenges that led to this last-minute application. Can you elaborate on how those challenges have shaped your academic goals?" Elizabeth chose her words carefully. "Dr. Torres, I've learned that the biggest obstacle to achievement isn't lack of ability. It's other people's limited expectations of what you're capable of. When someone tells you that dreams don't pay bills, they're really telling you to accept limitations that don't actually exist. I refuse to accept those limitations. And if you receive this scholarship, what do you hope to accomplish at MIT?" "I want to work in aerospace engineering, specifically on materials for deep space exploration. But more than that, I want to prove something important, that innovation doesn't require privilege. Some of the greatest advances in science have come from people who had to fight for their opportunities. I want to be part of that tradition." After the presentation, Elizabeth waited. The committee would make their decision by Monday, the same day her enrollment deposit was due at MIT.
That weekend felt endless. Carmen tried to distract Elizabeth with movies and cooking, but nothing could shake the anxiety. Elizabeth had given everything to that presentation, laid her soul bare in front of strangers who held her future in their hands. On Sunday night, Roberto showed up at their apartment unannounced. He looked different, tired, older somehow. His usual swagger was gone. "I heard you applied for some big scholarship," he said, not meeting Elizabeth's eyes. News travels fast. "Carmen told my wife about the presentation." He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Elizabeth, about the money, don't." Elizabeth's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare apologize now because you think I might actually succeed. That's not, Roberto struggled with words. "I never thought you'd actually have a shot at MIT. I figured you'd end up at community college anyway, so what did it matter?" "It mattered because it wasn't yours to take. It mattered because you stole 5 years of my mother's sacrifice. It mattered because you looked at everything I'd accomplished and decided it was worthless." Roberto stared at the floor. "The investment fell through. Lost everything. I can't pay it back." "I know. Your business is being foreclosed on. Mrs. Chen's husband works at the bank." His head snapped up in surprise, but Elizabeth continued. "You want to know the difference between you and me, Uncle Roberto? When you faced a challenge, you took the easy way out. You stole from your family. When I faced a challenge, I worked harder. That's why one of us is going to succeed, and it isn't you." Monday morning arrived like a final exam Elizabeth couldn't study for. She sat in her first period class, phone hidden in her lap, refreshing her email every 30 seconds. Carmen had taken the day off work too nervous to focus on her patients. At 11:47 a.m., the email arrived. Elizabeth's hands trembled as she opened the email. The subject line read simply, "Patricia Morgan Memorial Scholarship Decision." She held her breath and clicked. "Dear Ms. Martinez, It is with tremendous pleasure that we inform you that you have been selected as the year's recipient of the Patricia Morgan Memorial Scholarship. Your presentation was nothing short of extraordinary, and your resilience in the face of personal challenges embodies everything the scholarship was created to honor. The phone slipped from Elizabeth's hands, clattering to the floor. Around her, AP Calculus continued as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis. She raised her hand, voice barely steady enough to ask for a bathroom pass. In the empty hallway, Elizabeth called her mother. "Mija, what's wrong? Why are you calling during school? Mija, what's wrong? Why are you calling during school? Mija, what's wrong? Why are you calling during school?" "Mom," Elizabeth whispered, then louder, "Mom, I got it. I got the scholarship. Full ride to MIT." The silence stretched so long Elizabeth thought the call had dropped. Then she heard something she'd never heard before. Her strong, resilient mother sobbing with pure joy. "How much?" Carmen finally managed. "Everything, Mom. Tuition, room, board, books, even a stipend for expenses. They're flying me to Boston next week for orientation." Carmen's laughter mixed with tears. "Your father would be so proud, Mija. So proud." Word spread quickly through Phoenix High. By lunch, Elizabeth found herself surrounded by classmates who'd barely acknowledged her existence for 4 years, all suddenly eager to celebrate her success. Teachers who'd written her recommendation letters beamed with pride, and Mrs. Chen practically glowed as she announced the news to the science department. But Elizabeth found herself thinking about Roberto. Not with anger anymore. That had burned itself out. With something closer to pity. He'd been so certain that dreams didn't pay bills, so convinced that people like them were destined for mediocrity. She wondered what it felt like to be so spectacularly wrong about someone you dismissed. She didn't have to wonder for long. That evening, as Elizabeth and Carmen celebrated with takeout Chinese food, their first splurge in months, Roberto appeared at their door again. This time, he wasn't alone. His wife, Maria, and their twin daughters, Sophia and Isabella, stood behind him, all looking uncomfortable. "Congratulations," Roberto said stiffly. Maria heard about the scholarship at the grocery store. Apparently it made the local news. Indeed it had. Local student overcomes family tragedy, earns full ride to MIT, ran in the Phoenix Tribune that afternoon, with Elizabeth's senior photo and quotes from her teachers about her extraordinary research. "Thank you," Elizabeth replied evenly. Roberto shifted his weight, his usual confidence completely absent. "Look, Elizabeth, I owe you an apology. What I said about dreams not paying bills, I was wrong." "Yes, you were. I never finished high school myself, Dropped out at 16 to work construction with my dad. I've built a business, made good money, but I never understood what you were trying to do. It seemed so unrealistic." Elizabeth studied her uncle's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced with something she'd never seen before. Genuine remorse mixed with confusion. He truly hadn't understood what he was dismissing. "The money's gone, Roberto. I can't get it back, and you can't give it back. But I want you to understand something." Elizabeth stepped closer. "That money was not just numbers in an account. It was my mom working 18-hour shifts in a hospital, dealing with sick people and death and families falling apart, then coming home exhausted and still helping me with homework. It was her skipping meals so she could put $20 away for my future. It was 5 years of sacrifice by someone who believed in me when the rest of the world, including you, thought I was reaching too high." Roberto's face crumpled. I know, and I'm sorry. I thought I was being realistic, but I was just being small-minded." "You weren't being realistic. You were afraid." Elizabeth's voice softened slightly. "You were afraid that if I succeeded, it would mean you'd settled for less than you could have achieved. That's not my fault, and it wasn't my mom's fault, and it sure as hell wasn't worth stealing from us to avoid facing it."
Maria stepped forward, her own eyes wet. "Elizabeth, Roberto told me what he did. We've been fighting about it for months. I'm so ashamed. If I'd known—" "You would have stopped him?" Elizabeth asked. "Yes, God, yes.
That money was for your education. Roberto's been gambling with the business for years. I knew something like this would happen eventually, but I never thought he'd take from family. Sophia, Roberto's 14-year-old daughter, spoke up quietly. Elizabeth, I think what you did is amazing. I want to study engineering too when I graduate. Elizabeth looked at her younger cousin, really looked at her for the first time. Sophia was quiet at family gatherings, often overshadowed by her more outgoing twin sister. But there was something familiar in her eyes, a hunger for knowledge that Elizabeth recognized. What kind of engineering? Elizabeth asked. Environmental. I want to help solve climate change. Roberto looked startled. Sophia, honey, you never told me that. You never asked. Sophia's voice was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. You always just assumed I'd do something normal. The parallel wasn't lost on Elizabeth. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a business card she'd received that morning from Dr. Sarah Kim, the MIT alumna who'd helped her apply for the scholarship. Sophia, Dr. Kim runs a summer program for high school students interested in STEM fields. It's at Arizona State, completely free, and they provide mentoring for college applications. She told me to pass this along to any younger students who might be interested. Sophia took the card with reverence, reading every word twice. Really? They'd let someone like me apply? Someone like you? Sophia, you're getting straight A's in honors classes. You're exactly who they want. Roberto watched this exchange with growing discomfort. Sophia doesn't need some fancy program. She can go to community college, get a good practical degree. Dad, Isabella interrupted, speaking for the first time. Stop. Just stop. The room went quiet. Isabella was usually the diplomat in the family, the peacekeeper who smoothed over conflicts. Her blunt intervention surprised everyone. Elizabeth just won a full scholarship to MIT. MIT, Dad, after you stole her college money and told her dreams don't pay bills. And you're standing here trying to do the same thing to Sophia that you did to Elizabeth. Isabella's voice was steady but fierce. Don't you see how wrong you were? Roberto looked around the room at faces that reflected disappointment, pity, and, in his daughter's case, active defiance of his worldview. For a man who prided himself on being the successful brother, the business owner, the provider, it was a devastating moment of clarity. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted quietly. You can't fix it, Elizabeth said, but you can learn from it. You can stop telling people their dreams are too big. You can start believing that your daughters might achieve things you never imagined. And you can stop confusing cynicism with wisdom. Carmen, who'd been quietly watching the entire exchange, finally spoke. Roberto, I forgave you the day I told Elizabeth what happened, not because you deserved it, but because carrying anger would have hurt us more than it hurt you. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Elizabeth earned the scholarship despite what you did, not because of anything you contributed. Roberto nodded, his throat tight. The business is gone. Foreclosure papers came yesterday. Maria's going back to work, and we'll probably lose the house, too. I'm sorry to hear that, Elizabeth said, and meant it. But, Roberto, dreams do pay bills. My dream of becoming an aerospace engineer is going to pay very well, actually. MIT graduates in my field start at about $90,000 a year, with potential for much higher earnings. My dream is going to let my mom a house, pay off her debts, and maybe even help Sophia with college if she wants. Dreams pay bills when you're willing to work for them instead of just wishing for them. After Roberto's family left, Elizabeth and Carmen sat in their small living room, processing everything that had happened. The scholarship letter sat on their coffee table, still seeming surreal despite the official MIT letterhead. Mija, Carmen said softly, I need you to know something. Even if you hadn't gotten the scholarship, even if you'd had to go to community college or take a different path, I would still be proud of you. You didn't have to prove anything to me or to Roberto or to anyone else. Elizabeth leaned against her mother's shoulder. I know, Mom, but I had to prove it to myself. When Roberto said dreams don't pay bills, part of me wondered if he was right, if maybe I was being naive or unrealistic. Getting this scholarship didn't just open doors, it validated something I needed to believe about myself and about what's possible. And now? Elizabeth smiled, thinking about her upcoming move to Cambridge, her research opportunities, the professors who'd been impressed enough by her work to offer mentorship. Now, I know he wasn't just wrong about dreams paying bills, he was wrong about everything that matters. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. Dr. Sarah Kim drove down from Flagstaff, where she'd been visiting family, to meet Elizabeth in person. Over coffee at a diner near Phoenix High, she shared something that put Elizabeth's achievement in even sharper perspective. Elizabeth, I want you to know that your scholarship application was reviewed alongside some of the most impressive students in the country. Students from Exeter and Andover, kids whose parents are Nobel laureates or Fortune 500 CEOs. They had resources you can't imagine: private tutors, fully equipped labs, internships at major corporations. Elizabeth nodded. Mrs. Chen mentioned the competition was intense. What you accomplished in that tiny high school lab with equipment you built yourself was more impressive than research projects that cost $50,000 to produce. The committee was unanimous, not just in selecting you, but in recognizing that your resourcefulness and determination represent the very best of what education can achieve. As Dr. Kim spoke, Elizabeth realized something profound. Roberto hadn't just been wrong about her potential, he'd been wrong about the nature of achievement itself. He'd assumed success came from connections, from having money, from being born into the right circumstances. But her scholarship proved that brilliance, creativity, and sheer determination could triumph over any disadvantage. Dreams didn't just pay bills, they paid them spectacularly well.
Elizabeth Martinez was about to become living proof that when family fails you, when circumstances work against you, when everyone tells you to lower your expectations, sometimes the best response is to aim even higher and let your success speak for itself. MIT was waiting, and Elizabeth was ready to show the world exactly how much dreams were worth. 3 years later, Elizabeth stood in the gleaming lobby of SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, adjusting her blazer one final time before the most important meeting of her life. The internship coordinator had been cryptic about why they'd requested this additional interview, given that her summer research position had already been confirmed months ago. MIT had transformed Elizabeth in ways she never expected. The girl who'd once built testing equipment from car jacks and strain gauges now worked in laboratories that looked like something from science fiction. Her sophomore year research on advanced ceramic composites had caught the attention of Professor David Chen, one of the world's leading experts in aerospace materials. Under his mentorship, Elizabeth had published 2 papers in peer-reviewed journals, unprecedented for an undergraduate. But success at MIT came with unexpected challenges. Elizabeth quickly discovered that brilliance alone wasn't enough in an environment where everyone was brilliant. Her first semester grades were solid but not spectacular, a humbling experience for someone accustomed to academic dominance. She'd called Carmen in tears after receiving her first B+ in thermodynamics. "Mija, you're at the best engineering school in the world," Carmen had reminded her gently. "A B+ from MIT means more than an A+ from anywhere else." The real breakthrough came during Elizabeth's second year, when she approached a problem differently than her classmates. While others focused on incremental improvements to existing materials, Elizabeth wondered if they were asking the wrong questions entirely. Instead of making spacecraft components stronger, what if they could make them self-healing? Her research into shape memory alloys, integrated with bio-inspired healing mechanisms, attracted attention far beyond MIT. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency offered funding for her junior year project. NASA invited her to present at their annual materials conference, and now SpaceX wanted to discuss something they called a special opportunity. The meeting room on the 4th floor overlooked the factory floor, where Falcon Heavy rockets were assembled. Elizabeth had toured the facility the day before with other interns, but being back here for this mysterious additional meeting felt surreal. The door opened, and Elizabeth nearly dropped her portfolio. Gwyneth Park, SpaceX's chief technology officer, entered with two other executives Elizabeth recognized from industry publications. These weren't the mid-level engineers she'd expected to meet with. These were people who made decisions about humanity's future in space. Ms. Martinez, Dr. Park said, extending her hand, "Thank you for staying an extra day. I know this disrupted your travel plans." "Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Park, though I have to admit I'm not entirely sure what this meeting is about." Dr. Park smiled. "We've been following your research on self-healing composites. Your MIT advisor shared some preliminary results that frankly had our entire materials team staying late to run their own simulations." Elizabeth felt her pulse quicken. "Professor Chen shared my research?" "With your permission, yes." "Elizabeth, what I'm about to tell you is confidential until we make an official announcement next month. SpaceX is beginning development on our Mars colonization vehicle, the ship that will carry the first 100 humans to establish a permanent settlement on Mars." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Elizabeth had grown up dreaming of moments like this, but the reality felt almost too large to process. "The challenge," continued Dr. Park, "is creating materials that can self-repair during a 2-year journey through deep space, followed by decades of operation on Mars, with no possibility of resupply from Earth. Traditional material science approaches won't work. We need something revolutionary." Dr. James Liu, the director of Advanced Propulsion, leaned forward. "Your self-healing composite research represents exactly the kind of breakthrough thinking we need. But we're not just offering you a summer internship, Elizabeth. We want to offer you a position on the Mars Vehicle Development Team, starting immediately after graduation." Elizabeth stared at him. "I'm sorry, did you say immediately after graduation? I still have a year left at MIT. "We're prepared to work with MIT to structure your senior year as a cooperative education program. You'd spend 3 days a week here, working on Mars vehicle materials, and 2 days completing your coursework remotely. Your senior thesis would be directly integrated with our development program." Dr. Park added, "Elizabeth, we're offering you the chance to help solve one of the most critical challenges in human space exploration. The materials you develop could be what makes permanent Mars settlement possible." Elizabeth's mind raced. This was beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd first applied to MIT. "What would my role be exactly?" "Lead researcher for autonomous repair systems in extreme environments. You'd have a team of 12 engineers and a budget of $15 million for the first phase. Elizabeth, at 21 years old, you'd be the youngest lead researcher in SpaceX history." The weight of the offer settled over her. Lead researcher, Mars colonization, $15 million budget. It was the kind of opportunity that came once in a generation, if at all. "Can I ask what made you consider someone who hasn't even graduated yet for this position?" Dr. Liu smiled. "Honestly, it was your background as much as your research. Our team reviewed hundreds of applications from researchers with decades of experience, but they all approached the problem with conventional thinking. You approach it differently because you had to solve problems with limited resources your entire life. That resourcefulness, building your own testing equipment, finding creative solutions with minimal funding, that's exactly what we need for Mars."
Elizabeth thought about Roberto's words from 3 years earlier. Dreams don't pay bills. She wondered what he'd say if he could see her now, being offered a position that would likely make her a millionaire before age 25, while working on humanity's greatest adventure. "There's one more thing," Dr. Park said. "This program comes with equity participation. If the Mars mission succeeds, and you remain with the company through the first crewed landing, you'll own a significant stake in the most important technological achievement in human history." Elizabeth felt dizzy. How significant? "Enough that you could retire by 30 if you wanted to, though I suspect someone with your drive won't want to retire." The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises to have contracts ready within the week. Elizabeth walked back through the SpaceX lobby in a daze, past displays of rocket engines and spacecraft that suddenly felt personal rather than aspirational. On the flight back to Boston, Elizabeth called Carmen to share the news. Her mother's reaction was everything she'd hoped for: pride, excitement, and just a hint of motherly concern about her daughter moving across the country again. Mija, I'm so proud of you, but are you ready for this kind of responsibility? Leading a team? Managing such a large budget? Elizabeth looked out the airplane window at the landscape scrolling by 30,000 feet below. Mom, 3 years ago, I built testing equipment out of car parts because I couldn't afford the real thing. Now I'm being asked to help design vehicles for Mars because they need someone who thinks outside conventional limitations. I think I'm ready. And if Uncle Roberto could see you now? Elizabeth paused, considering. I think Roberto would finally understand what dreams are actually worth. But Roberto's reaction, when Elizabeth told the family about her SpaceX offer at their next gathering, surprised everyone. He listened quietly as Elizabeth described the Mars colonization project, the research opportunities, and the potential financial rewards. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Elizabeth, he said finally, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a thank you. A thank you? Watching what you've accomplished, seeing Sophia get accepted to that summer program, and now talking about applying to engineering schools herself, you've changed how my whole family thinks about what's possible. Sophia shows your MIT research papers to her friends. Isabella is taking advanced placement physics because she wants to understand what you're doing. You didn't just prove me wrong about you proved me wrong about everything. Elizabeth studied her uncle's face. The arrogance and defensiveness were completely gone, replaced by genuine admiration tinged with regret. Roberto, I didn't do this to prove you wrong. I did it because I refuse to let your limitations become mine. I know, and that's what makes it even more impressive. He paused, struggling with words. I lost the house last year. We're renting a small apartment now, and I'm working for someone else's construction company. But you know what? I'm happier than I've been in years because I finally stopped trying to prove I was successful and started focusing on actually being useful. Maria nodded. Roberto's been volunteering at the community college, helping other students who dropped out of high school get their GEDs. He's good at it. It's not glamorous, Roberto admitted, but helping people who made the same mistakes I did, seeing them get their diplomas at 40 or 50 years old, it feels like I'm finally contributing something worthwhile instead of just taking. Maria nodded. Roberto's been volunteering at the community college, helping other students who dropped out of high school get their GEDs. He's good at it. It's not glamorous, Roberto admitted, but helping people who made the same mistakes I did, seeing them get their diplomas at 40 or 50 years old, it feels like I'm finally contributing something worthwhile instead of just taking. Elizabeth felt an unexpected warmth toward her uncle. His theft had been devastating at the time, but in some strange way, it had forced her to prove her worth in ways that might never have happened otherwise. Not that she'd ever thank him for it. The cost to her mother had been too high for gratitude. But she could acknowledge that adversity had revealed strengths she might never have discovered. Sophia got into the summer program, Elizabeth said. Dr. Kim called me last week. They were impressed with her application. Roberto's face lit up with genuine pride. She's been working on her project proposal for months, something about using algae to clean pollution from water supplies. I don't understand half of what she's talking about, but I can see how excited she gets when she explains it. That's the difference, Elizabeth realized. You're not trying to understand everything Sophia's doing. You're supporting her enthusiasm for it. That's what she needs. As the family gathering wound down, Sophia approached Elizabeth privately. I want to ask you something, Sophia said quietly. Do you ever doubt yourself? Like, do you ever think maybe you're reaching too high? Elizabeth considered the question carefully. Every single day, especially now with this SpaceX opportunity. But Sophia, I've learned that self-doubt isn't necessarily a bad thing. It keeps you humble and motivated. The problem isn't having doubts, it's letting other people's doubts become your limitations. But what if I'm not as smart as you? Sophia, intelligence isn't a competition. You don't need to be me. You need to be the best version of yourself.
And from what I've seen of your water purification research, you're already thinking about problems in ways that could change the world. Sophia smiled, her confidence visibly growing. Will you help me with my college applications when the time comes? I'll do better than that. I'll introduce you to Dr. Kim and some other mentors who can guide you through the process. And Sophia, when you do get into engineering school, not if, when, remember that you earned it, just like I earned mine. Don't let anyone, including family members who mean well, convince you to aim lower than your capabilities. Driving home that evening, Elizabeth reflected on how completely her life had changed since Roberto's theft. What had seemed like catastrophic betrayal had ultimately become the catalyst for achievements beyond her wildest childhood dreams. In 6 months, she'd be working on technology that could make humanity a multiplanetary species. Dreams, it turned out, didn't just pay bills, they could literally reach other worlds.
Roberto had been wrong about everything that mattered, but his wrongness had inadvertently created the conditions for Elizabeth to prove just how spectacularly wrong he'd been. Sometimes, the greatest gift your enemies can give you is underestimating your potential. 2 years after joining SpaceX, Elizabeth stood in front of a wall-sized monitor displaying real-time data from the Martian surface. The first automated materials testing facility had been operational on Mars for 6 months, validating the self-healing composites she'd developed in the sterile environment of Earth laboratories. The results exceeded every projection. Temperature cycling from -80 to +20 Celsius, radiation exposure equivalent to 12 years in Earth orbit, and the material is actually performing better than our Earth-based simulations predicted, announced Dr. Sarah Chen, Elizabeth's lead material scientist. Elizabeth, your polymer matrix is adapting to the Martian environment in ways we never anticipated. Elizabeth studied the data streams with satisfaction tinged by disbelief. Her team had achieved something unprecedented, creating materials that didn't just survive in alien environments, but actually improved under stress. The implications extended far beyond Mars colonization. The auto-repair functionality is triggering micro-improvements at the molecular level, Elizabeth explained to the gathered team. Each stress cycle is making the material stronger and more flexible simultaneously. It's like biological evolution compressed into mechanical timescales. Her phone buzzed with a message from MIT professor David Chen. Elizabeth, NASA wants to discuss incorporating your materials into the Artemis moon base project. When you have a moment, please call Dr. Rodriguez at Johnson Space Center. This could be big. Big. Elizabeth smiled at the understatement. At 23, she was already being consulted on humanity's expansion into the solar system. The shy girl who'd once salvaged car parts to build testing equipment now held 17 patents and commanded the respect of aerospace engineers twice her age. But success had brought unexpected complications. The previous month, a journalist from Fortune magazine had published a profile titled "The Genius Who Started with Nothing," detailing Elizabeth's journey from Roberto's betrayal to SpaceX leadership. The article painted her as an inspirational figure overcoming family adversity, but it also brought unwanted attention to her personal life. Roberto had called her after the article was published, his voice strained with emotion. "Elizabeth, I'm getting reporters calling me, asking about what I did to your college fund. I know I have no right to ask this, but you don't want your mistakes broadcast to the world," Elizabeth had finished. "Roberto, I never mentioned your name to that journalist. They found out through public records and started digging on their own. I know, I'm not blaming you. I wanted you to know that I've been in therapy for the past year, working through why I did what I did. And I wanted to ask if there was anything I could do to make amends, even though I know the money can never be repaid." Elizabeth had considered his request. Roberto's construction skills were still solid, even if his business judgment had been catastrophic. Actually, there might be something. Mom's been talking about renovating the kitchen in her new house. If you're serious about making amends, you could donate your labor to that project. The renovation had taken 3 weeks, with Roberto working evenings and weekends to transform Carmen's modest kitchen into something worthy of a magazine. He'd refused payment and had even covered the cost of materials from his wages at the construction company where he now worked. "It's not enough," he'd told Elizabeth when the project was finished. "It'll never be enough to balance what I took from you and your mother.
but it's a start. Elizabeth had watched Roberto's genuine effort at redemption with mixed feelings. She couldn't forget the betrayal, but she could acknowledge his attempts to become better. More importantly, his transformation had influenced Sophia's trajectory in remarkable ways. Sophia, now a senior in high school, had evolved into a formidable young scientist in her own right. Her water purification research had won the state science fair and attracted offers from environmental engineering programs at Stanford, Berkeley, and MIT. But it was her speech at the awards ceremony that had impressed Elizabeth most. People told me that kids from working-class families shouldn't aim for elite universities, Sophia had said to an audience of teachers, parents, and students. They said we should be realistic about our limitations. But my cousin Elizabeth taught me that the only real limitation is accepting other people's definitions of what's possible. I refuse to accept those limitations. The parallels weren't lost on anyone in the audience. Sophia was following Elizabeth's path, but creating her own version of success focused on environmental challenges rather than space exploration. Elizabeth's current project represented the culmination of everything she'd learned about pushing boundaries. SpaceX had greenlit her proposal for a revolutionary spacecraft hull design that could self-repair, adapt to different environments, and even evolve its properties based on mission requirements. The prototype would launch in 18 months aboard a Falcon Heavy, carrying materials that might one day protect the first humans to reach Mars. But the most satisfying validation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Morgan's daughter, who administered the scholarship fund that had changed Elizabeth's life, requested a meeting during a recent visit to Los Angeles. Elizabeth, when my mother established this scholarship, she wanted to support students who would use their education to solve meaningful problems, Jennifer Morgan had explained over lunch in Santa Monica. In 20 years of awarding scholarships, you're the first recipient whose work has the potential to fundamentally alter human civilization. I think that might be an overstatement, Elizabeth had replied modestly. Is it? Your materials could make permanent space habitation possible. They could revolutionize construction on Earth, making buildings that repair themselves after earthquakes or hurricanes. The applications your team is exploring could affect how humanity lives for centuries. I don't think it's an overstatement at all. Jennifer Morgan's words crystallized something Elizabeth had been thinking about for months. Her success wasn't just personal vindication, it represented proof that investing in underlooked potential could yield extraordinary returns. She'd been considering how to pay that forward. I want to establish my own scholarship program, Elizabeth announced to her team during their weekly meeting, specifically for first-generation college students from families that don't believe higher education is worthwhile or achievable. Dr. Chen looked up from her tablet. That's very generous, Elizabeth, but wouldn't existing need-based programs cover those students? Not necessarily. There are brilliant kids whose families actively discourage their academic ambitions. Kids whose parents or relatives tell them that dreams don't pay bills, that they should be realistic about their limitations. Those students need more than financial support. They need someone who understands what it feels like to have your own family bet against your potential.
Roberto had been wrong about everything that mattered, but his wrongness had inadvertently created the conditions for Elizabeth to prove just how spectacularly wrong he'd been. Sometimes the greatest gift your enemies can give you is underestimating your potential. 2 years after joining SpaceX, Elizabeth stood in front of a wall-sized monitor displaying real-time data from the Martian surface. The first automated materials testing facility had been operational on Mars for 6 months, validating the self-healing composites she'd developed in the sterile environment of Earth laboratories. The results exceeded every projection. Temperature cycling from -80 to +20 Celsius, radiation exposure equivalent to 12 years in Earth orbit, and the material is actually performing better than our Earth-based simulations predicted, announced Dr. Sarah Chen, Elizabeth's lead material scientist. Elizabeth, your polymer matrix is adapting to the Martian environment in ways we never anticipated. Elizabeth studied the data streams with satisfaction tinged by disbelief. Her team had achieved something unprecedented, creating materials that didn't just survive in alien environments, but actually improved under stress. The implications extended far beyond Mars colonization. The auto-repair functionality is triggering micro-improvements at the molecular level, Elizabeth explained to the gathered team. Each stress cycle is making the material stronger and more flexible simultaneously. It's like biological evolution compressed into mechanical timescales. Her phone buzzed with a message from MIT professor David Chen. Elizabeth, NASA wants to discuss incorporating your materials into the Artemis moon base project. When you have a moment, please call Dr. Rodriguez at Johnson Space Center. This could be big. Big. Elizabeth smiled at the understatement. At 23, she was already being consulted on humanity's expansion into the solar system. The shy girl who'd once salvaged car parts to build testing equipment now held 17 patents and commanded the respect of aerospace engineers twice her age. But success had brought unexpected complications. The previous month, a journalist from Fortune magazine had published a profile titled "The Genius Who Started with Nothing," detailing Elizabeth's journey from Roberto's betrayal to SpaceX leadership. The article painted her as an inspirational figure overcoming family adversity, but it also brought unwanted attention to her personal life. Roberto had called her after the article was published, his voice strained with emotion. "Elizabeth, I'm getting reporters calling me, asking about what I did to your college fund. I know I have no right to ask this, but you don't want your mistakes broadcast to the world," Elizabeth had finished. "Roberto, I never mentioned your name to that journalist. They found out through public records and started digging on their own." "I know, I'm not blaming you. I wanted you to know that I've been in therapy for the past year, working through why I did what I did. And I wanted to ask if there was anything I could do to make amends, even though I know the money can never be repaid." Elizabeth had considered his request. Roberto's construction skills were still solid, even if his business judgment had been catastrophic. Actually, there might be something. Mom's been talking about renovating the kitchen in her new house. If you're serious about making amends, you could donate your labor to that project. The renovation had taken 3 weeks, with Roberto working evenings and weekends to transform Carmen's modest kitchen into something worthy of a magazine. He'd refused payment and had even covered the cost of materials from his wages at the construction company where he now worked. "It's not enough," he'd told Elizabeth when the project was finished. "It'll never be enough to balance what I took from you and your mother, but it's a start." Elizabeth had watched Roberto's genuine effort at redemption with mixed feelings. She couldn't forget the betrayal, but she could acknowledge his attempts to become better. More importantly, his transformation had influenced Sophia's trajectory in remarkable ways. Sophia, now a senior in high school, had evolved into a formidable young scientist in her own right. Her water purification research had won the state science fair and attracted offers from environmental engineering programs at Stanford, Berkeley, and MIT. But it was her speech at the awards ceremony that had impressed Elizabeth most. "People told me that kids from working-class families shouldn't aim for elite universities," Sophia had said to an audience of teachers, parents, and students. "They said we should be realistic about our limitations. But my cousin Elizabeth taught me that the only real limitation is accepting other people's definitions of what's possible. I refuse to accept those limitations." The parallels weren't lost on anyone in the audience. Sophia was following Elizabeth's path, but creating her own version of success focused on environmental challenges rather than space exploration. Elizabeth's current project represented the culmination of everything she'd learned about pushing boundaries. SpaceX had greenlit her proposal for a revolutionary spacecraft hull design that could self-repair, adapt to different environments, and even evolve its properties based on mission requirements. The prototype would launch in 18 months aboard a Falcon Heavy, carrying materials that might one day protect the first humans to reach Mars. But the most satisfying validation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Morgan's daughter, who administered the scholarship fund that had changed Elizabeth's life, requested a meeting during a recent visit to Los Angeles. "Elizabeth, when my mother established this scholarship, she wanted to support students who would use their education to solve meaningful problems," Jennifer Morgan had explained over lunch in Santa Monica. "In 20 years of awarding scholarships, you're the first recipient whose work has the potential to fundamentally alter human civilization." "I think that might be an overstatement," Elizabeth had replied modestly. "Is it? Your materials could make permanent space habitation possible. They could revolutionize construction on Earth, making buildings that repair themselves after earthquakes or hurricanes. The applications your team is exploring could affect how humanity lives for centuries. I don't think it's an overstatement at all." Jennifer Morgan's words crystallized something Elizabeth had been thinking about for months. Her success wasn't just personal vindication, it represented proof that investing in underlooked potential could yield extraordinary returns. She'd been considering how to pay that forward. I want to establish my own scholarship program, Elizabeth announced to her team during their weekly meeting, specifically for first-generation college students from families that don't believe higher education is worthwhile or achievable. Dr. Chen looked up from her tablet. That's very generous, Elizabeth, but wouldn't existing need-based programs cover those students? Not necessarily. There are brilliant kids whose families actively discourage their academic ambitions. Kids whose parents or relatives tell them that dreams don't pay bills, that they should be realistic about their limitations. Those students need more than financial support. They need someone who understands what it feels like to have your own family bet against your potential. Elizabeth had already spoken with her financial advisor about the logistics. Her SpaceX equity and patent royalties could fund full scholarships for 12 students annually, with mentorship and research opportunities included. She wanted to call it the Dreams Pay Bills Scholarship, a direct rebuke to Roberto's dismissive philosophy. The program's first recipient would be Sophia, whose acceptance to MIT's environmental engineering program had been confirmed the previous week. But Elizabeth had larger ambitions for the scholarship fund. I want to find students whose families don't just lack resources, but actually oppose their educational goals, she told the scholarship committee she'd assembled. Students who have to overcome family sabotage, not just family poverty. The committee included Dr. Sarah Kim, who'd helped Elizabeth navigate the original MIT application process, and 3 other successful professionals who'd overcome similar challenges. Their first meeting produced a list of criteria that went beyond traditional academic metrics. We should look for resourcefulness, suggested Dr. Kim, students who've had to be creative about accessing educational opportunities. And resilience, added Dr. Michael Torres, a software engineer whose family had pressured him to drop out of college to work in their restaurant. Students who've persisted despite active discouragement from people who should have been supporting them. Elizabeth nodded. We want to find the kids who are working in school libraries until closing time because they don't have quiet study spaces at home. The ones who are building science projects with materials from hardware stores because their schools don't have proper labs. The ones whose families think their academic achievements are somehow threatening or impractical. The scholarship program launched with a media campaign that attracted national attention. Applications poured in from students across the country, each one telling a story of potential stifled by family limitations or economic constraints. Reading the applications, Elizabeth was struck by how many variations existed on her own story. A student in rural Kentucky whose parents insisted she study cosmetology instead of computer science. A young man in Detroit whose father demanded he join the family auto repair business instead of pursuing mechanical engineering. A girl in small-town Texas whose extended family mocked her interest in astrophysics as putting on airs. These kids are fighting the same battle I fought, Elizabeth told Carmen during one of their weekly phone calls. They're trying to prove that intelligence and ambition aren't betrayals of where they come from. Carmen's voice was thoughtful. Mija, do you think Roberto really believed what he said about dreams not paying bills? Or was he just afraid of what it would mean if you succeeded? Elizabeth considered the question. I think he was afraid that if I could achieve something extraordinary starting from the same place he started, it would force him to confront why he'd settled for so much less than his potential. My success would prove that his limitations were choices, not circumstances. And now? Now I think he's finally comfortable with who he is. He's not trying to prove anything anymore. He's just trying to be useful. That's actually healthier than spending your life chasing other people's definitions of success. The scholarship program's impact exceeded Elizabeth's expectations. The first cohort of 12 recipients included students whose research interests ranged from quantum computing to marine biology to renewable energy systems. More importantly, their families' attitudes began shifting as the students achieved academic success. One recipient, Marcus Thompson from Atlanta, sent Elizabeth a video message 6 months into his freshman year at Georgia Tech. Miss Martinez, I wanted you to know that my father apologized to me last week. He said watching me excel in my engineering courses made him realize he'd been wrong about college being a waste of time. He's actually proud of me now instead of worried that I'm abandoning the family. Similar stories emerged from other scholarship recipients. Parents who'd innately opposed their children's academic ambitions began bragging about their college students to neighbors and coworkers. Siblings started asking about scholarship opportunities for themselves. Extended families began viewing higher education as achievable rather than pretentious. Elizabeth realized she'd created something more powerful than a scholarship program. She'd created a mechanism for transforming family attitudes across generations. Each successful student became an ambassador for the value of education in communities that had previously been skeptical. The ripple effects extended to her own family. Isabella, Roberto's younger daughter, had been accepted to UC San Diego's marine biology program. Sophia's environmental engineering research was already attracting attention from graduate programs. Even Roberto's perspective had evolved beyond recognition. "You know what the difference is between you and me?" Roberta had asked Elizabeth during Sophia's high school graduation party. "When you faced a challenge, you figured out how to overcome it. When I faced a challenge, I looked for someone else to blame or something to take. You built solutions. I just took shortcuts." Elizabeth had smiled at the observation. "Roberta, the difference isn't intelligence or talent. The difference is that I refuse to accept that my circumstances defined my possibilities. You accepted limitations that weren't real." "Dreams do pay bills," Roberta had acknowledged quietly. "They pay bills better than anything else because they motivate you to create value instead of just claiming it." Standing now in the SpaceX facility, watching data from Mars confirm that her materials were performing beyond every expectation, Elizabeth reflected on the journey from Roberta Stedft to interplanetary engineering. Dreams didn't just pay bills, they paid them spectacularly while pushing humanity toward futures that cynics couldn't even imagine. In 6 months, Elizabeth would turn 24. By then, her scholarship program would have supported 48 students, her materials would be incorporated into 3 different space missions, and her patents would have generated enough royalties to make her financially independent for life. Roberta had been wrong about everything. Dreams didn't just pay bills, they built entire new worlds. 5 years after joining SpaceX, Elizabeth received a call that would change not just her life, but potentially the trajectory of human civilization. She was reviewing thermal stress data in her Hawthorne office when her assistant knocked urgently. "Elizabeth, there's someone from NASA on line 1. Says it's about the Breakthrough Starshot project." Elizabeth's pulse quickened. Breakthrough Starshot was humanity's first serious attempt at interstellar travel, sending tiny spacecraft to Proxima Centauri using light sails powered by ground-based lasers. The project had been theoretical for years, limited by materials that couldn't survive the intense acceleration and 20-year journey through deep space. "Dr. Martinez?" The voice belonged to Dr. Elena Vasquez, director of NASA's Advanced Propulsion Laboratory. "I'm calling about your self-healing composites research. We have a proposal that might interest you." "I'm listening." The Breakthrough Starshot Consortium has been struggling with materials challenges for their interstellar probes. Traditional materials can't handle the acceleration forces or the radiation exposure during a 20-year journey to another star system. Your adaptive composites might be the solution we've been waiting for. Elizabeth set down her tablet, giving the conversation her full attention. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We want to offer you the position of Chief Materials Engineer for the Starshot mission. You'd be responsible for developing materials that can survive interstellar travel and function autonomously for decades without any possibility of repair or maintenance." The magnitude of the offer hit Elizabeth like a physical force. Interstellar travel, materials that would carry human technology to another star system for the first time in history. Her work wouldn't just affect Mars colonization, it could enable humanity's first steps toward becoming a galactic species. Dr. Vasquez, I'm honored by the offer, but I have to ask, why me? There are researchers with decades more experience in extreme environment materials. Because your approach is fundamentally different. Traditional aerospace materials are designed to resist damage. Your materials embrace it, using stress and environmental challenges to become stronger and more adaptive. For a 20-year journey through unknown cosmic conditions, we need materials that can evolve and improve themselves. Elizabeth's mind raced through the technical challenges. The spacecraft would experience acceleration forces thousands of times greater than Earth's gravity, followed by 2 decades of cosmic radiation, micrometeorite impacts, and temperature fluctuations that would destroy conventional materials within months. What's the timeline? Launch window is 7 years. The probes need to be completed, tested, and mission-ready within 6 years to make the orbital mechanics work. 6 years to develop materials for humanity's first interstellar mission? Elizabeth felt the familiar combination of excitement and terror that accompanied every major challenge in her career. I'll need to see the technical specifications and mission parameters before I can give you an answer. Of course, but Elizabeth, there's something else you should know. This isn't just a NASA project anymore. The European Space Agency, Japan, China, and private partners, including SpaceX, are all contributing. You'd be leading the materials effort for the entire international consortium. After the call ended, Elizabeth sat in her office contemplating the offer. Leading materials development for humanity's first interstellar mission would be the pinnacle of any aerospace engineer's career. But it would also mean leaving SpaceX during the critical development phase of the Mars colonization vehicle. She called Carmen first, as she always did when facing major decisions. "Mija, tell me about this project," Carmen said after Elizabeth explained the offer. "It's about sending spacecraft to another star, Mom, not just another planet, an entirely different solar system. If it succeeds, it would prove that humans can eventually travel to other stars." Carmen was quiet for a moment. "And they want you to make this possible?" "They want me to develop materials that can survive a 20-year journey through space conditions we've never tested. It's incredibly challenging, maybe impossible." "Elizabeth, do you remember what you told me when you were 17, right after Uncle Roberto took the college money? That I was going to prove him wrong?" "No, Mija. You said you were going to prove that the impossible was just another word for no one's figured it out yet. This sounds kind of impossible." Carmen's words crystallized Elizabeth's feelings. This was exactly the kind of challenge she'd been preparing for her entire career, a problem that seemed unsolvable until someone approached it differently. The technical briefing at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory revealed the full scope of the challenge. The Starshot probes would be tiny, weighing less than a gram each, but they'd need to survive acceleration to 20% of light speed and then function independently for decades. "The acceleration phase alone will subject your materials to forces equivalent to being hit by a freight train," explained Dr. James Wright. "Then they'll spend 20 years exposed to cosmic radiation levels that would sterilize Earth's surface." Elizabeth studied the mission parameters with growing excitement. Every constraint seemed designed to eliminate conventional approaches and demand revolutionary thinking. "What about communication with Earth during the journey?" "Impossible," Dr. Wright admitted. "Once they're launched, the probes are completely autonomous. Your materials need to anticipate and adapt to problems we can't even imagine." Elizabeth accepted the position 3 weeks later, with an agreement that allowed her to maintain consulting relationships with SpaceX and her scholarship program. The Interstellar Materials Laboratory at JPL became her new home, equipped with testing facilities that could simulate conditions more extreme than anything in the solar system. Her first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While reviewing applications for her scholarship program, Elizabeth noticed a proposal from Maria Santos, a high school student in El Paso, whose research focused on extremophile bacteria, organisms that thrived in seemingly impossible conditions. "These bacteria don't just survive in environments that would kill everything else," Maria had written. "They actually use extreme conditions as energy sources, becoming more active and resilient under stress." The biological parallels sparked an insight that transformed Elizabeth's approach. Instead of creating materials that resisted damage, what if she could create materials that used damage as fuel for self-improvement? Her team spent 18 months developing what they called evolutionary composites, materials with molecular structures that rearrange themselves in response to stress, radiation, and temperature changes. Each challenge the material faced triggered adaptations that made it stronger and more capable. The first prototype tests exceeded every projection. Materials exposed to simulated interstellar conditions didn't just survive, they developed new properties that improved their performance. Radiation exposure triggered the formation of protective crystalline structures. Temperature cycling created more efficient thermal management systems. Micrometeorite impacts activated self-sealing mechanisms that left the material stronger than before. Elizabeth, what you've created isn't just a material, Dr. Vasquez observed during a review meeting. It's almost like artificial evolution compressed into mechanical timescales. The breakthrough attracted attention far beyond the aerospace community. The Department of Energy wanted to incorporate the technology into nuclear reactor components. The military saw applications for armor systems that improved under combat conditions. Medical device manufacturers inquired about implants that could adapt to changing body chemistry. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Roberto requested a meeting during one of Elizabeth's rare visits to Phoenix. They met at the same diner where Elizabeth had once celebrated her MIT scholarship, but the dynamic between them had transformed completely. Roberto looked older but more at peace, wearing work clothes that showed honest labor rather than the expensive accessories he'd once favored. "I've been following your work on the space project," he said without preamble. "I don't understand the science, but I understand the significance. You're helping humanity reach other stars." Elizabeth nodded. "It's the most challenging project I've ever worked on." "I wanted to tell you something. Last month, I was working on a house renovation, and the homeowner recognized my name from that old newspaper article about your scholarship. He asked if I was related to Elizabeth Martinez working on interstellar travel." Roberto paused, his voice becoming emotional. "I told him you were my niece, and he said I must be incredibly proud. And you know what, Elizabeth? I am proud. Not because I contributed anything to your success. I know I didn't, but because I'm related to someone who refused to accept the limitations I tried to put on her. Roberto, you don't need my forgiveness anymore. You haven't needed it for years." "I'm not looking for forgiveness. I'm looking for a way to help other kids avoid the mistakes I made with you." Roberto pulled out a worn notebook. "I've been volunteering at the community college, working with students whose families don't support their education. Kids whose parents think college is a waste of time, whose relatives tell them to be realistic about their prospects." Elizabeth examined the notebook, which contained detailed records of students Roberto had mentored, their academic progress, and their family situations. "There's a kid named David Chen, no relation to your professor, whose father runs a restaurant and expects David to take over the business instead of studying computer science. Another girl, Patricia Williams, whose grandmother raised her and thinks nursing school is aiming too high." Roberto's voice grew stronger. "I'll tell these kids about you, about how someone told you that dreams don't pay bills, and how you proved that dreams pay bills better than anything else." Elizabeth felt a profound shift in her relationship with Roberto. He'd evolved from someone who stole her opportunities to someone who created opportunities for others facing similar challenges. "Roberto, would you be interested in partnering with my scholarship program? We could use someone who understands the family dynamics these students are dealing with." "You'd want me involved in your scholarship program?" "I'd want you involved because you understand both sides of the equation. You know what it's like to be threatened by someone else's potential, and you know what it's like to regret limiting someone you should have supported." "Roberto, you don't need my forgiveness anymore. You haven't needed it for years." "I'm not looking for forgiveness. I'm looking for a way to help other kids avoid the mistakes I made with you." Roberto pulled out a worn notebook. "I've been volunteering at the community college, working with students whose families don't support their education.
Kids whose parents think college is a waste of time, whose relatives tell them to be realistic about their prospects. Elizabeth examined the notebook, which contained detailed records of students Roberto had mentored, their academic progress, and their family situations. There's a kid named David Chen, no relation to your professor, whose father runs a restaurant and expects David to take over the business instead of studying computer science. Another girl, Patricia Williams, whose grandmother raised her and thinks nursing school is aiming too high. Roberto's voice grew stronger. I'll tell these kids about you, about how someone told you that dreams don't pay bills, and how you proved that dreams pay bills better than anything else. Elizabeth felt a profound shift in her relationship with Roberto. He'd evolved from someone who stole her opportunities to someone who created opportunities for others facing similar challenges. Roberto, would you be interested in partnering with my scholarship program? We could use someone who understands the family dynamics these students are dealing with. You'd want me involved in your scholarship program? I'd want you involved because you understand both sides of the equation. You know what it's like to be threatened by someone else's potential, and you know what it's like to regret limiting someone you should have supported. 6 months later, Roberto Martinez became the first family advocacy coordinator for the Dreams Pay Bills Scholarship Program. His role involved working with recipients' families, helping parents and relatives understand why their children's academic pursuits deserved support rather than skepticism. The program's success rate improved dramatically with Roberto's involvement. Families that had initially opposed their children's college plans began celebrating academic achievements. Parents who demanded practical career choices started researching graduate school opportunities. Roberto has a gift for this work, Dr. Sarah Kim observed during a program review meeting. He can relate to family members who feel threatened by their children's ambitions because he's been there himself. But he can also show them what it looks like to grow beyond those limitations. Elizabeth's interstellar materials research reached a crucial milestone as her 27th birthday approached. The evolutionary composites had passed every extreme environment tests, and prototype spacecraft were being assembled for preliminary trials. The technology she developed in response to Roberto's theft was now enabling humanity's first steps towards the stars. Standing in the JPL laboratory, watching technicians integrate her materials into spacecraft that would carry humanity to Proxima Centauri, Elizabeth reflected on the journey from her uncle's betrayal to interstellar engineering. Roberto had been catastrophically wrong about dreams not paying bills, but his wrongness had inadvertently created the conditions for achievements that would outlast human civilization on Earth.
Dreams didn't just pay bills, they paid them across interstellar distances, with interest compounding over decades of space travel. Roberto's theft had stolen $18,000. Elizabeth's response was helping humanity steal fire from the stars themselves. The impossible had indeed turned out to be just another word for no one's figured it out yet, and Elizabeth Martinez had figured it out spectacularly. 10 years after Roberto's theft, Elizabeth stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York, delivering a speech that would be remembered as the moment humanity officially became an interstellar species. Today, at 3:47 p.m. Eastern Time, we received confirmation that the Starshot probe SX-7 has successfully entered the Proxima Centauri system, she announced to thunderous applause. The materials and technology aboard this probe are functioning perfectly after a 20-year journey through deep space. The audience erupted in sustained applause. Elizabeth waited for quiet, then continued. This achievement represents more than technological triumph. It proves that human ingenuity, determination, and refusal to accept limitations can literally reach the stars. In the VIP section, Carmen Martinez wiped tears from her eyes while Roberto sat beside her, his own face reflecting amazement and pride. Sophia, now Dr. Sophia Martinez with a PhD in environmental engineering, recorded the speech on her phone to share with her students. The probe's success had exceeded every projection. Elizabeth's evolutionary composites hadn't just survived the interstellar journey, they'd adapted and improved during 2 decades of cosmic radiation exposure. The materials were now more advanced than anything in Earth's laboratories, having essentially evolved in the vacuum of space.
After the UN ceremony, Elizabeth found herself in Central Park with her family, celebrating privately away from the media attention. Roberto approached her with something he'd been carrying for years. "Elizabeth, I brought this to give back to you." He handed her a worn savings account booklet, the original college fund account where Carmen had deposited 5 years of sacrifice. "Roberto, this account has been closed for over a decade." "I know, but I wanted you to have the physical reminder of what your mother built and what I took away." His voice was steady but emotional. "That $18,000 your mother saved could never have bought what you've achieved. But the work ethic and determination that saved it, that's what really funded your success." Elizabeth accepted the booklet, understanding its symbolic weight. "You know what, Roberto? You were right about one thing." "What's that?" "Dreams don't pay bills." Elizabeth smiled at his confused expression. "Dreams do something much more valuable. They build futures that didn't exist before someone dared to imagine them." Carmen joined them, her nurse's uniform replaced by an elegant dress suitable for addressing world leaders. "Mija, your father would be so proud, not just of the space achievement, but of how you've helped so many other students reach their potential." The Dreams Pay Bills scholarship had now supported over 200 students. Graduates were working at NASA, Tesla, Google, and dozens of other companies pushing technological boundaries. Several had started their own companies, creating thousands of jobs and generating billions in economic value. Roberto's family advocacy work had expanded internationally, helping families across 6 countries understand why their children's academic ambitions deserved support. His transformation from dream stealer to dream enabler had become a case study in redemption and personal growth. "Uncle Roberto," Sophia said, joining their conversation, "remember when you told Elizabeth that dreams don't pay bills?" Roberto laughed, a sound filled with genuine humor rather than bitter irony. "I remember thinking I was being realistic. Turns out I was just being small-minded." "Well, her dreams just paid for humanity's expansion into the galaxy. I'd say that's pretty good bill-paying capability." As evening approached, Elizabeth walked alone through the park, processing the magnitude of what had been accomplished. The probe, currently sending data from Proxima Centauri, contained materials she'd developed in response to Roberto's betrayal. Humanity's first interstellar mission exists because someone had once told her that dreams don't pay bills. Her phone buzzed with a message from Maria Santos, the former scholarship recipient whose extremophile research had inspired the evolutionary composites breakthrough. Maria was now Dr. Santos, leading NASA's astrobiology program and searching for life in the data streaming back from Proxima Centauri. "Elizabeth, we're detecting chemical signatures that suggest possible biological activity on Proxima b. Your materials made it possible for us to discover we might not be alone in the universe. Dreams don't just pay bills, they answer the biggest questions humanity has ever asked." Elizabeth looked up at the early evening sky, knowing that somewhere among those distant points of light, technology she'd created was exploring an alien world. Roberto's theft had seemed catastrophic at 17. At 27, it looked like the best thing that had ever happened to her in her education and career. She thought about all the students currently working in underfunded laboratories, building equipment from salvaged parts, and facing family members who thought their ambitions were unrealistic. Somewhere among them were the engineers who would design humanity's first faster-than-light drive, the scientists who would discover extraterrestrial life, the innovators who would solve challenges not yet imagined. Dreams didn't just pay bills, they paid them across star systems, compounding interest over decades of space travel, generating returns measured in the expansion of human knowledge and capability. Roberto Martinez had been wrong about everything that mattered, but his wrongness had inadvertently created the conditions for proving just how spectacular human potential could be when it refused to accept artificial limitations. Elizabeth Martinez had transformed theft into triumph, betrayal, and family sabotage into interstellar success. Dreams didn't pay bills, they built entire new worlds among the stars. The impossible had turned out to be exactly what she'd always believed, just another word for no one's figured it out yet, and she had figured it out magnificently. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.